Hello, I'm Terry Christensen, and this is Valley Politics. Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren has represented this area in the House of Representatives for almost 30 years through Speakers Newt Gingrich, Nancy Pelosi, and now Kevin McCarthy, as well as through 3 impeachments and the January 6th insurrection. For all of last year, she served on the special committee investigating the events of January 6th. According to the New York Times, she served as Nancy Pelosi's eyes and ears on the committee. After collecting evidence for over a year, the committee produced an 845-page report that's been described as a very long indictment against Donald Trump, including criminal referrals of the former president to the Department of Justice. Today, Zoe will take us behind the scenes of the committee's work. But first, here's an excerpt of her statement at the committee's final hearing last December.
The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the last 18 months, the Select Committee has conducted a congressional investigation of enormous scale, seeking to uncover the depth and breadth of ex-President Trump's multi-part plan to reverse the lawful outcome of the 2020 presidential election. We've compiled an immense volume of documents collected from countless individuals, law enforcement agencies, and federal and state authorities. Many of our efforts to get the evidence required litigation in federal court, including the U.S. Supreme Court. We've taken the testimony of hundreds of witnesses. Now, while we couldn't show them all during the hearings, we focused on those who were most central, including our ex-president's White House aides, his senior Department of Justice officials, and senior members of his campaign. Based on this assembled evidence, the Select Committee has reached a series of specific findings. Now, many of these findings pertain to what has been called the big lie, the enormous effort led by ex-President Trump to spread baseless accusations and misinformation in an attempt to falsely convince tens of millions of Americans that the election had been stolen from him. Beginning even before the election and continuing through January 6th and thereafter, Donald Trump purposely disseminated false allegations of fraud in order to aid his effort to overturn the 2020 election. Ex-President Trump's decision to declare victory falsely on election night wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was premeditated. The committee has evidence that ex-President Trump planned to declare victory and unlawfully to call for the vote counting to stop, and that he told numerous allies about his intent in the weeks before the election. Still, ex-President Trump repeated those false claims and tried to convince his supporters the election was stolen. This was an attempt to justify overturning the lawful election results. Donald Trump knowingly and corruptly repeated election fraud lies, which incited his supporters to violence on January 6th. He continues to repeat his meritless claim that the election was stolen even today, and continues to erode our most cherished and shared belief in free and fair elections. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
And now, here's Zoe. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us.
Of course.
We're going to talk about the work of the January 6th committee today, but before that, tell us where you were on January 6th and what it was like.
Well, because I was chairing the House Administration Committee, I was one of the 4 tellers. So when the Vice President opened the envelope, he handed the paper to us to read, and we knew that Arizona would be a challenge. Actually, then Speaker Pelosi had tasked several of us, me, Adam Schiff, Jamie Raskin, and Joe Neguse, with preparing for the challenges. And so prior to that, we had worked with each of the delegations. They were ready to defend their voters, but they didn't necessarily have the case law and all of the cases that had been brought. So we were ready. I was on the floor. I was the first Democrat to speak, and at the time there was no vaccine, and the Republicans refused to wear masks, weirdly enough. And I thought, they're going to give me COVID.
Yeah.
I couldn't leave the floor, so I went off into the cloakroom to watch on C-SPAN till it was my turn to speak again. And I thought, well, it's C-SPAN, but why don't I turn on CNN, see what's going on? And I saw then there was a mob outside the Capitol, and it didn't look good. And a Capitol police officer, or member of the Sergeant at Arms, I don't know which to this day, but he was in plain clothes, came up. He said, "I can't believe I found the key," and locked the door to the cloakroom out to the hallway.
Wow.
And so I went back onto the floor and told the members who were waiting, there's a mob that's coming in. One of the members, who was a former law enforcement officer, said, "Don't worry, there'll be, a SWAT team will take that down." I'm going, I'm not explaining this well enough. And sure enough, within not too long, we could hear noises and pounding. The speaker was evacuated. The police told us to shelter, take out the gas masks, and then we were evacuated out of the Capitol.
So it wasn't just a group of tourists going through the Capitol?
Oh, no. We could hear them pounding on the door, and people were trying to keep the door from being, opened.
Yeah.
And, it was a big deal.
Well, let's get into the workings of the committee. First of all, why was it a special committee and not a commission like September 11th? Well,
the Speaker and all of us, actually, that night, Rodney Davis, who was the ranking member of the House Administration Committee, said, we've got to have a commission like the 9/11 Commission. And I said, I agree, we'll work on that together. And I was trying to do that, but it turned out the jurisdiction was actually in the Homeland Security Committee, not our committee. And the Speaker wanted a commission, and Benny Thompson, the chairman, was working with John Katko, the senior Republican, and Kevin McCarthy kept throwing out demands, and every demand that was thrown out was met. And finally, they had a bill, but McCarthy wouldn't accept it, even though everything he said was in it, and couldn't take yes for an answer. I don't know, my guess is the ex-president didn't want a commission. But in any case, the Speaker wasn't just going to let it go, and so all she had left was a committee that she could appoint, which she did. And there we go.
So she appointed the committee, and Kevin McCarthy, the Republican minority leader, put forward names to be on the committee. Right. Pelosi rejected a couple of those names who were extreme MAGA Republicans.
Well, one of them was a witness, too. Jim Jordan, although he...
So when she rejected those members, he withdrew all his nominees.
Correct.
So there were initially no Republicans on the committee,
correct.
And then two Republicans, Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, who had voted to impeach Donald Trump, joined the committee over Kevin McCarthy's wishes, probably. Do you think McCarthy made a big mistake not having some Republicans on the committee?
Of course he did. We had, unlike most committee hearings where you have, the Democrats and Republicans sniping at each other, and it's like a food fight, which everyone is so distressing to watch. We didn't have any of that. We had every member just trying to find the truth, pulling in the same direction. So it was a huge decision if he wanted to prevent the truth from coming out.
And they really missed a chance to be on national TV. I don't think they knew how effective your committee was going to be at reaching the public with the events.
Well, I don't know if we would have been effective had Jim Jordan been on the committee.
I think you're probably right. Well, what was it like working with Kinzinger and Cheney?
Great. I worked probably more closely with Liz than any other member of the committee. She and I put together a rewrite of the Electoral Count Act and some other things, although I got along fine with all of the members. It's interesting. She and I don't agree on a whole variety of other issues, but that didn't keep us from defending the Constitution and finding the truth. And I enjoyed working with her. She's smart. She's really hardworking. And we worked well together.
She was pretty forceful in what she had to say on the committee.
Yes, she was.
Absolutely. Well, all right, so the committee's set up and functioning.
It was set up, but it wasn't functioning.
Okay, it was set up. a bunch of decisions were made about how it would operate that made it unlike any other congressional committee ever, probably. A traditional committee, no offense to a member of Congress, but a sequence of Congress members get a specified amount of time and they rant or pontificate or actually ask questions of a witness on subjects of their choice, and then it moves on to the next one and alternates between parties, and often those committee sessions aren't really very focused. They don't produce the kind of evidence and actually dramatic TV that your committee produced. So when and where and how were the decisions made to do this differently?
Well, we were, you know, we had to staff up after we hired, you know, a director and staff director and a lead investigator and a bunch of other staff. We had to get equipment, you know, get an office, that sort of thing. As we were doing, we had a little message chain that the members were on, and one of the members said, well, you know, when I have my 5 minutes, and I said, if we do the 5-minute rule, we're doomed. And others agreed. And so we decided that we would, you know, there was a lot of pressure to have a bunch of hearings right away. And we did have an early hearing in the, about we really had the Capitol Police officers and a display of what happened.
A very dramatic meeting.
And it was important, we thought, to remind people what this was about, what had happened. And then we're getting to have more hearings, and we decided we're not, no matter what people say, we're not going to have hearings until we have something to say. And so we went into the investigative phase. We interviewed like over 1,000 people. Not all of them were transcribed, not all of them were subpoenaed. Most of them were done remotely. I mean, it was still during COVID, and the members of Congress participated, not in all of them, because we'd have 2 or 3 going on the same day at the same time.
And staff does a lot of this work.
Staff did a lot of the work, but the members, I probably went on every day. I was on an interview, and we'd sort of share who was going to do what to some extent, so we'd have most of them covered, and that took a lot of time. And we compiled, at one point, I asked Tim Heafy, who was the chief investigative staffer, whether we were recording, I mean, early on, and he said, well, no, I mean, we don't have the equipment. And I said, got an iPhone? I mean, you know, we have to video these meetings. And so, you know, he didn't argue. He was a very good investigator, but he was new to the Congress. I mean, it was his experience.
What was his background?
He is a former U.S. attorney, had been a general counsel for the University of Virginia. And by the way, the political right wing got rid of him when he went over to our committee, which I thought was an unfair price for him to pay. But anyhow, that was done, and it turned out to be an important decision.
Well, that video recording was absolutely crucial to your end report and to the visual nature of that end report when you played the recordings, which you could also edit. So unlike kind of endless witness questioning that some committees get into, you could focus on the bits of the interview that were most relevant.
You couldn't have a hearing with hundreds of witnesses.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah, right, yeah. But the committee also hired the ex-head of ABC News and a whole team
James. Well, it was a very small group. That was later. That was really just before we stared the hearings that were the bulk of the hearings.
Well, whose idea was that? Can you tell us?
Actually, I don't know. You know, we were talking about the need that, you know, to present in a way that was coherent, digestible, and I kept saying from the outset, this can't just be some bound book you put on the shelf. You know, people get information differently now than they did, you know, even after 2001, and certainly after, you know, I mean, you don't just read stuff, you get stuff online, you get stuff on TV, you get it visually, you get a podcast. I mean, and so we needed to present information in that way that was accessible to the public.
And I don't know if you would have been on primetime TV if it hadn't been produced in that way.
Probably not.
Because it really made great TV.
Yeah, we actually, the first hearing, I thought, you know, we didn't know, you know, and you're part of an event, you don't know how it's being perceived by others. But the feedback we got was very positive, that people understood what was being presented, and so that was good.
but also the members of the committee were very thoroughly choreographed, rehearsed.
Yes.
You were reading from a
Correct.
teleprompter.
That's correct.
I should know what a teleprompter is.
Yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah.
And that's pretty unusual for members of Congress.
Yes, it
and
is.
it seemed to me, watching the hearings, you were all pretty disciplined
Yeah.
about it. People didn't go off script. What were the rehearsals like?
Well, it was a presentation more than a hearing, I guess. The work and the fact-finding had gone on prior to the presentation. Each one of us, members of Congress want to play a role. That's why we get elected. We don't want to just be a potted plant. But we decided rather than each one of us trying to do each hearing, we would assign each member of the committee kind of be the lead on a committee, on one of the hearings. And so I was the second, I think primarily by seniority. And what we did was go through in advance of the presentation, the high points of what we wanted to say. We knew what the topic was. It was the big con. It was the money, for example, the big lie, how we found out about it, the witnesses, who told us, to make the story coherent. And so it was a process that was more chaotic than it maybe appeared when we went on TV, because you can't have a 5-hour hearing and keep your audience. I mean, you need to have about 90 minutes roughly to make your point, to give your evidence. And so there were so many things I wanted to have on, but there just wasn't time. And so there were not arguments, kind of arguments, but not acrimonious. This has to be in, this can't be in, this is too long, rewriting what we were going to say. So it wasn't as if somebody gave us, a script. We wrote it. And we made some changes as we went along. For example, I hadn't intended, follow the money was important. Obviously, the ex-president lied to his supporters. He took money under false pretenses. And so I ad-libbed the big con in the hearing, but it was a big con.
Well, that's pretty remarkable. Well, it's very innovative for Congress to have that much discipline among the members, and everybody went along.
Well, it was more important to us that the truth be told in a coherent way than we, got our face on TV. We were all disciplined because there was a lot of sacrifice to be on this committee. Liz lost her race, and she knew that was a very high probability that could happen. For the Democrats, we weren't going to lose our race, but it sucked up all the time in the day. All of the other obligations I had, how I did that and still slept and still met at least the minimum obligations of other committee assignments, it was not easy. And so I didn't want to fritter that away, that responsibility away, just for no good reason. We had to be disciplined, and we all agreed with that.
I have to say the videotaping that you urged right at the beginning or early on, in the end was really crucial to making it good TV and for you all to be able to tell a story almost like an oral history by the people who participated, or almost all of the people who participated.
And you can say it wasn't all, for example, when you had the two officials in the Department of Justice, we had pictures of them and like a fake phone line, because it wasn't videotaped. You can imagine if all of it had been like, it was okay for 1 or 2 presentations, but if the whole thing had been that, it wouldn't have seemed credible.
The New York Times says you were the eyes and ears of Nancy Pelosi on the committee. True?
No.
No?
She came, she said, I was surprised to read that. I said, well, so was I.
I don't know if you saw Jill Lepore's writing about the committee session in the New Yorker. She was critical of the report for, I guess, being kind of superficial and focusing just on Donald Trump and not going deeper on why people believe Donald Trump, including many of your colleagues in Congress who still believe and are election deniers and even January 6 deniers virtually. Do you think the committee should have tried to get more at why we're so divided and why people still believe
Well,
despite what you reported?
our mission was to find out, what happened leading up to January 6th and what happened on January 6th. And certainly the development of a cult was part of that. Our colleagues who enabled it were part of it. But as you'll know, we did ask and then subpoena several members on the Republican side. They all refused to come in and talk to us. When we interviewed kind of the ground troops, I mean, the people who invaded, we did ask them, why and how they came to be. And I'm not sure they all understood the forces that was at work on them, but most of them deeply regretted it. It had ruined their lives. We did have interwoven in the report the role of social media, which was, as well as traditional media. If you take a look at some of the footnotes, this is something we all insisted on. If you're going to have a footnote, you have to have all of the evidence that's cited in the footnote, unlike many congressional reports. So you can see the role of Fox News, the role of some of the social media platforms in promulgating the lie that people believed.
So there was some of that there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
There's massive footnotes in the report.
Well, and my theory was, and to some extent it has been true, that all of the evidence that we put out would be of interest to reporters. And that was true at the beginning, but I think a lot of the reporters kind of lost interest as time went on. There's a treasure trove of information in the footnotes.
Do you think the report changed anyone's mind about January 6th or Donald Trump, or that it will change anybody's mind?
I think it did. I think for the people who were essentially, captured in a cult-like mode, probably it didn't change their views. But if you take a look, I mean, at the beginning, one of the reporters asked me, how will you know if this is a success? And I remember saying, it'll be a success if a large number of the American people have a renewed passion for the democracy and a renewed support of the Constitution. And the next election, after the January 6th event, a majority of people said they were voting to protect the democracy. And I think that was because we displayed, you can't take this for granted. Just because we're Americans doesn't mean de facto we get to be a democracy. Everyone who's here has to defend it and defend the Constitution.
You did get pretty good ratings for your TV shows. Millions of people watched
Right.
every single session, some more than others. But
Of course, Fox wouldn't cover it at
Yeah.
night, but if we had it in the day, Fox covered it. So there was at least one occasion when we could have done it at night and done it in the day. Well, let's have it on Fox and do it in the day.
That was smart. That was smart. So the report concludes with criminal referrals
Right.
of former President Donald Trump to the Department of Justice. Do you think anything will come of those referrals? Do you think he'll be prosecuted for?
I don't know. We were very focused on the separation of powers. We were the Congress, they were the executive branch. And so, we weren't telling them what we were doing, and they weren't telling us what they were doing. Obviously, they had everything we had when we were through. It seemed to me that they were kind of behind us. I mean, you can't tell for sure because they weren't sharing, but it didn't look like from the witnesses they were bringing in, reporters reported on going into the grand jury, that they were really where we were in some cases. That maybe that's not the case. I don't know for sure. But now it looks like the pace has picked up. And of course, their burden, we thought that the president, ex-president, had committed various crimes, and that's why we did the referral. But the prosecutor has to decide whether there's probable cause, which we thought there was. But I'm sure they're also thinking, given the high profile, is there evidence sufficient to prove beyond a reasonable doubt?
Can we get a conviction?
Because
Yeah.
To charge and then to acquit would be very tumultuous situation for the country.
Yes, indeed. So shifting gears a little bit, you were first elected to Congress in 1994.
Correct.
The same year Newt Gingrich and the Republicans gained a majority, and that's kind of when some of the vitriolic politics really shifted into high gear.
A lot of this is Newt's fault.
Norm Mineta was in Congress when
For a
you
while.
were there. Well, he left
Yeah.
after that 1994 election. Unlike you, Norm was used to being in the majority.
Correct.
You joined when the Democrats were a minority.
I hadn't expected that, but I coped. Actually, my first day in Congress was the day Newt became Speaker, and he did, you know, I had worked as a staffer in the Congress. I had worked for Don Edwards before I went on to my own elected office. But Newt told his freshmen that we were the devil, basically. We were corrupt. They should not be around us at all. We didn't have the traditional retreat, bipartisan retreat. He canceled that. The freshman class is invited to meet with the president and the vice president of the cabinet. I went over to the White House and found that none of the Republicans had gone.
Bill Clinton is president at the time.
Yes,
yeah.
and Leon Panetta said that Newt had called him. Leon was the chief of staff and said that he was directing the Republicans not to come. It was a different, it was like they're your enemy, not someone you disagree with, and it went downhill from there.
Yeah, a lot of people think this all started with Donald Trump.
Oh, no.
In fact, it didn't at all. Well, so now we have Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House. Do you think the tone and operation has it changed at all from Newt Gingrich's time? Or?
Yes, because Newt was, he was an odd guy and had, you know, very extreme mood swings, and he was erratic in ways, but he did have a certain discipline. McCarthy doesn't know what he's doing. You know, he goes back and forth. I do think that the extremists really are calling the shots for him because he's got such a narrow majority. And they changed the rules so anyone can demand a
Just
vote.
one member.
Me included.
Yeah.
To vacate the chair. And he's out of a job as Speaker, and so he's trying to, you know, make sure the people who would do that are the extremists. So he's got to appease them. But appeasing them is an electoral loser for the Republican Party, and so he's going back and forth. For example, you know, the president, ex-president, said he's going to be indicted and there should be demonstrations. Well, first Kevin said, well, you know, it's terrible what they're doing, and we're going to investigate, and we're going to, you know, it's okay to have demonstrations. Shortly thereafter, he said there shouldn't be any demonstrations. It should be calm, and that shows the division that he's in. Plus, I don't think he's much of a person who has great vision. I don't think he has something he wants to achieve in terms of policy, except to be the Speaker.
So what are your own plans? You've got a district that's substantially new to you, runs all the way down the Salinas Valley, plus our old neighborhoods in San Jose. And also our former mayor, Sam Liccardo, has said he might run against you. Is he thinking you'll do a Norm Mineta and pull out? Or?
I don't know what he's thinking. You have to ask him. But I'm running for reelection. And you're right, it is a new district. I've spent a lot of time down in my newfound time now that January 6th is over, down in the new parts of the district, and I'm really loving the people I'm meeting down there. There's some things I want to get accomplished. I'm over on the Science Committee as the top Democrat now. One of the reasons I went as the top Democrat there is the Lawrence Livermore National Lab got ignition on the fusion program, the National Ignition Facility. We need to power up on that. We need to double down on the science on that if we're ever going to have a fusion as an energy source. It's not there now, it's science now, not energy production. But the physicists are telling us if we did a massive emphasis on it, we could have fusion as a power plant, you know, in a decade instead of 2 or 3 decades. So that's something I'm really focused on, as well as I never thought I'd be in the position of having to defend the January 6th committee. So that is falling to me as well. I still hope and work on immigration reform, but the Republicans have made clear they're just against immigrants, whether they're legal or undocumented. They don't want any immigration. So it's very tough with the Republicans calling the shots in the House.
Well, that's a lot on your plate, and we haven't mentioned Silicon Valley Bank or the Pajaro flood or other issues. The floods all down the Salinas Valley.
Right. Well, I've been down there, and you know, the great thing is all the elected officials are pulling in the same direction. Jimmy Panetta has the coast, I have the inland. We've been working together. John Laird, the state senator, has most. He's a wonderful legislator and a wonderful person. Rob Rivas has most of the assembly area. So we all go together. And then the members of the Board of Supervisors, the city councils, and the mayors, everybody's working together. It's really fabulous. And we're going to get solutions for them.
Well, good luck with all that. We're out of time, Zoe Lofgren. Thank you very much for being with us today. Thanks for your work on the January 6th committee. Made a lot of good TV and a lot of good history, too. So
Thanks
thank you very
much.
much.
Thanks a lot, Terry.
We'll be back next month reporting on an exciting project that could transform a significant part of the East Side while sustaining the existing community. Meanwhile, you can follow us on Facebook, and you can catch up on all our previous shows on our website at creatvsj.org or on YouTube by searching for CreateTV San Jose. And now, that's all, folks. Thanks for watching.